What Vikings did to defeated warriors, wives will truly leave you speechless. Small wooden houses, clustered together on the rocky shoreline, creaked under the force of the gusts. Smoke curled from the chimneys, mingling with the mist that rolled in from the fjord. This was a typical morning in a Viking village, a place where life was both harsh and deeply intertwined with the natural world. Every sound, the crash of waves, the calls of seabirds, the clatter of metal, told a story of survival, vigilance, and community. Among the villagers, men prepared for the day with careful ritual. They sharpened axes and swords, tested the tension of their bows, and examined the strength of their shields. Each weapon had its own history, often passed down from father to son, and carried the mark of countless battles. The men understood that their tools were more than instruments of war. They were symbols of honor, courage, and protection for their families. Ragnar, the village leader, was a tall, broad-shouldered man whose presence commanded respect. His hair, tied back in a tight braid, reflected both the sunlight and the seriousness etched in his weathered face. Ragnar had spent his life learning the ways of combat and leadership, understanding that his role was to guide and defend his people in a world where danger was constant. The women of the village moved with equal purpose, though their tasks were different. They gathered water from the nearby stream, milked goats, baked bread in clay ovens, and repaired clothing worn thin by the harsh northern winds. Among them was Astrid, a woman in her late 20s, whose eyes carried the quiet strength of someone who had endured hardship yet remained unbroken. She worked alongside her younger sisters, preparing food for the household and weaving wool into thick garments for the coming winter. Every woman in the village carried a sense of responsibility. Their labor ensured that families could survive not just the cold months, but also the uncertainty of raids and conflicts that were a regular part of Viking life. Children played along the edges of the village, chasing each other with sticks, pretending they were warriors, learning the first lessons of courage and agility. Laughter echoed across the fjord, a sound that momentarily masked the ever-present tension. Even in times of peace, the villagers were alert. Every rustle in the forest, every distant shout, could signal danger. The Vikings had learned that life in the north demanded constant awareness. The village itself was a testament to resilience and practicality. Houses were built with thick wooden walls, insulated with straw and clay. Roofs were steeply pitched to let snow slide off, and every home contained a hearth that provided warmth and a place to cook. Livestock was kept close for protection, and small fields were tilled carefully to grow barley, oats, and vegetables that could survive the short growing season. Life was hard, but there was a rhythm to it, a rhythm that the villagers understood and respected. Ragnar gathered the men in the largest longhouse, the center of the village's social and political life. The longhouse was built from strong timber, with benches lining its walls and a wide hearth in the middle. Smoke spiraled up through the roof, carrying the scent of burning wood and dried herbs. The men stood in a semicircle, their faces serious as they listened to Ragnar speak. "Our neighbors have grown bold," Ragnar began, his voice deep and steady. "We know they are watching. We cannot afford to be caught off guard. Every man here has a duty to protect this village, to protect our families. We fight not for glory, but for survival." His words were met with nods of agreement and the quiet grunts of understanding. Each man knew the risks. The North was not a gentle land. It demanded strength, courage, and sometimes harsh decisions. Battles were a reality, and those who survived were often marked by both pride and scars. Ragnar continued, explaining the strategy for defending their village. He spoke of guard shifts, of securing food supplies, and of preparing weapons for sudden attack. Every detail mattered, because the difference between life and death could hinge on careful preparation. The men listened intently, absorbing the instructions and committing themselves to vigilance. Meanwhile, Astrid returned to her household, unaware that the village's calm would soon be shattered. She tended to the goats, her hands skilled and sure. The animals were her companions, a source of nourishment, and a symbol of stability in a world where stability was rare. As she worked, she thought of her husband, Bjorn, who had gone to check the northern fence line that morning. She hoped he would return safely, as she did every day, knowing that even small risks could turn tragic quickly. The fjord itself seemed calm, but that tranquility was deceptive. Viking raiders often approached quietly, using the natural fog to hide their movements. Longships low in the water could slip past watchful eyes and strike with devastating speed. The villagers had learned to read the signs of the environment, the sudden silence of birds, the unusual pattern of waves, the distant glint of metal in the sun. Nature was both an ally and a warning, offering hints of danger for those who paid attention. By midday, the village was bustling with activity. Smoke rose from chimneys, children ran errands for their parents, and men practiced fighting techniques to maintain readiness. Even those not directly involved in combat understood their role. Every person contributed to the survival of the community. There was a sense of pride in this interdependence, a quiet acknowledgement that each life mattered and each task had purpose. The calm shattered in an instant. A scout returned from the cliffs, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Ships, they approach!" he shouted. His voice cut through the village like a blade. The villagers froze for a moment, absorbing the words. Then, as if on cue, men grabbed their weapons and women ushered children into the longhouses. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made hearts pound and stomachs tighten. Ragnar moved quickly, his mind racing with plans. He instructed the men to form defensive positions along the shore, to protect the women and children, and to prepare for the inevitability of battle. Shields were raised, axes gripped tightly, and bows strung with precision. Every action was deliberate, born of years of training and the understanding that hesitation could be fatal. Astrid clutched her young daughter, feeling the fear rise in her chest. She looked around at the other women, seeing the same anxiety mirrored in their eyes. Yet beneath the fear was a thread of determination. These women had endured hard winters, food shortages, and previous attacks. They had learned that survival required courage, even when faced with unimaginable danger. The longships appeared on the horizon, slicing through the mist like dark knives. Painted prows gleamed in the sunlight, and the figures aboard could be seen preparing for attack. The sound of drums and horns carried across the water, a signal that battle was imminent. The villagers braced themselves, knowing that the moments to come would test every ounce of their strength and resolve. Ragnar's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold your ground, protect the village, for your families." His command carried authority, but also desperation. He understood that the lives of his people depended on their unity and courage. Every man and woman responded, drawing on the lessons and experiences that had shaped them since childhood. As the raiders neared, the villagers could see their faces, hardened, determined, and without mercy. These were not strangers. They were fellow humans shaped by the same brutal world, yet driven by a different clan, a different set of loyalties, and a different hunger for survival and dominance. The tension between the two groups was palpable, a mix of fear, respect, and the raw reality of conflict that had defined this land for generations. In the midst of preparation, Astrid felt a strange clarity. Fear was present, but it was accompanied by an understanding that she would do whatever was necessary to protect her family. She helped the younger children to a safer part of the village, teaching them how to stay quiet, how to watch for danger, and how to trust in those around them. In these small acts, courage manifested, not as a heroic gesture, but as practical action, the kind that often determined who would survive and who would not. The wind carried the cries of the approaching warriors, mixing with the shouts of the defenders. The village, once peaceful, became a scene of tension, strategy, and anticipation. Every person played their part, from the youngest child learning to hide to the eldest man offering guidance. The Vikings of this village knew the stakes, understood the risks, and accepted the reality of their lives. That survival required constant vigilance, bravery, and the willingness to face fear head-on. And so, as the first longships drew close, the villagers stood ready. The sea, the wind, and the cliffs bore witness to the moment before history would repeat itself, before the clash of warriors, the defense of homes, and the inevitable test of human endurance and spirit. In this northern land, where life was as harsh as it was beautiful, the people prepared to face the storm, not just of nature, but of human conflict. The first sound of the longships scraping against the shallow shore sent a wave of tension through the village. Children clutched their mothers' skirts, and the men tightened their grip on weapons that had been carefully prepared for such a moment. The approaching warriors were clad in chainmail and leather, their helmets glinting in the pale northern sun. Painted shields bore symbols of their clan, and their eyes, cold and focused, revealed no hesitation. These were seasoned fighters, trained for raiding, for conquest, and for leaving a mark on the world through fear and dominance. Ragnar took a deep breath and surveyed the shore. He could see his men standing in rough formation, shields raised, axes ready. Every man knew the stories of past battles, the victories that brought honor and the defeats that brought devastation. Today, the stakes were not abstract tales, they were real. Every life in the village depended on the courage, skill, and unity of its people. Ragnar's voice rose above the roar of the waves and the cries of the invaders. Hold the line, protect your families, stand firm. The clash began with a sudden intensity that startled even the seasoned villagers. Arrows whistled through the air, some finding their mark, others striking only shields or the ground. The raiders rushed forward, their movements precise and coordinated, while the villagers responded with practiced defiance. Swords met shields with metallic clangs, axes swung with deadly force, and the air filled with the sounds of struggle, shouting, and pain. Every second was a test of strength, courage, and endurance. Bjorn, Astrid's husband, fought at the forefront. His muscles burned, his heart raced, and his mind focused solely on the men around him. He swung his axe with precision, deflecting a strike aimed at his brother, then spinning to meet another attacker. The village had trained for years, but the chaos of real battle was different. The ground was slippery with blood and mud, and every movement carried the risk of injury or death. Yet there was no hesitation. Fear existed, but it was tempered by determination and the need to protect loved ones. Astrid, meanwhile, watched from the longhouse with a mixture of fear and determination. She had gathered the children and led them to the safest corner of the village, behind thick wooden walls. She whispered instructions to them, urging them to remain silent, to observe carefully, and to trust in the adults defending their home. Her hands trembled, but her mind was sharp. She understood that panic could spread faster than the enemy, and that courage, even in small doses, could mean the difference between life and death. The raiders advanced with relentless energy. They had come prepared to overwhelm, and their tactics reflected years of experience. One group attacked the village's defenses directly, while another tried to flank the men guarding the edges of the settlement. Ragnar shouted orders, moving quickly to plug gaps and rally his men. Every decision was critical, every command potentially life-saving. He knew that one misstep could lead to disaster for the entire village. Despite their best efforts, the villagers began to feel the pressure. The raiders were stronger in number, more organized, and driven by the same survival instincts that had guided the village men, but with a focus entirely on conquest. Shields splintered under repeated blows, arrows struck men and animals alike, and fires started in the wooden houses, sending smoke curling into the sky. The villagers fought with courage, but the reality of the situation began to sink in. This battle was not merely a test of skill, but a test of endurance, strategy, and, ultimately, fate. Bjorn's eyes scanned the battlefield, searching for his family among the chaos. He saw Astrid briefly, her figure small but determined as she moved among the children. That brief glance gave him renewed strength. He swung his axe with even greater force, cutting down one raider after another. Yet for every enemy felled, another seemed to take his place. The tide of the battle was relentless, and exhaustion began to weigh on even the strongest men. The village elders, who had fought in many raids before, moved among the younger warriors, offering guidance and encouragement. Their presence reminded the fighters of the lessons learned over years of hardship: when to strike, when to defend, when to retreat strategically. Even in the heat of battle, the wisdom of experience carried weight. Ragnar himself coordinated these efforts, moving like a conductor among a chaotic orchestra, ensuring that every man knew his role, even as the enemy pressed forward with terrifying energy. Despite their determination, cracks began to appear in the village's defense. The raiders, skilled in psychological warfare as well as combat, began to spread fear. Loud war cries, the sight of fallen comrades, and the destruction of property created panic among some of the younger, less experienced men. Fear is contagious, and even a single moment of hesitation could be deadly in a battle such as this. Ragnar recognized these moments and shouted to rally the men, reminding them why they fought: for their homes, for their families, for the lives of those who depended on them. Astrid witnessed the destruction from behind her shelter. She could hear the clash of weapons, the cries of pain, and the orders shouted across the battlefield. Fires had started to spread, consuming the roofs of some houses. The heat and smoke made her cough, but she remained steadfast. She helped children remain calm, reminding them of safe places and escape routes. She understood that fear would not help anyone survive, but careful observation, courage, and quick thinking could. In that moment, she realized that survival required both bravery and wisdom. The battle raged for hours, each side refusing to give ground. The raiders pushed with unyielding force, and the villagers responded with stubborn defiance. Yet, as time passed, the imbalance in numbers and preparation began to tell. The raiders' coordinated attacks slowly broke through the village defenses. One by one, the outer fences were breached, and the sounds of fighting grew louder and more desperate. Men who had fought bravely found themselves surrounded, while others struggled to protect their families from the advancing enemy. Bjorn fought valiantly, but eventually, even he found himself facing overwhelming odds. A group of raiders cornered him near the edge of the village. He swung his axe with all his remaining strength, deflecting blows and striking where he could. Yet there were too many enemies, and fatigue had begun to dull his reflexes. A forceful strike knocked him to the ground, and as he struggled to rise, he realized that he had been captured. His heart sank not for himself, but for Astrid and the children. He knew that the fight for survival had only just begun. The village, once vibrant and lively, now bore the marks of devastation. Homes were damaged or destroyed, livestock scattered or slain, and many men lay wounded or dead. The survivors, mostly women, children, and a few elderly men, were left to face the consequences of defeat. The raiders moved among them, assessing the spoils of conquest. In Viking culture, victory often meant not just winning the battle, but taking control of resources, property, and people. Those who survived the battle would now face a different kind of challenge, one that tested resilience, endurance, and the strength of the human spirit. Astrid's world had shifted in an instant. The men who had protected her village, her family, and her home were either gone or captured. She felt a mixture of fear, sorrow, and determination. She knew that her role had changed. She could no longer rely solely on others for protection. She had to think, act, and make decisions that would ensure her survival and that of the children under her care. In the quiet moments between the chaos, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The raiders, having secured the village, began to gather what they intended to take. They rounded up men, women, and children, sorting them according to strength, usefulness, and potential for labor or ransom. Weapons and valuables were collected, while homes were examined for anything of value. Fires continued to burn, smoke rising into the sky as a grim reminder of the battle that had unfolded. The villagers watched helplessly, their fate no longer in their hands, but determined by the victors. Among the captured, Bjorn and several other men were restrained and brought together. They exchanged brief, determined glances, understanding that their survival depended on endurance, intelligence, and perhaps chance. Even in defeat, there was an unspoken bond between these men, a shared understanding of courage, loss, and the relentless realities of their world. Each man thought of his family, praying silently that they would endure the new hardships to come. Astrid, now faced with the full reality of the situation, helped the children move to a safer, more hidden part of the village. She understood that the raiders' attention might soon turn to them, and that preparation and vigilance could be their only means of protection. She encouraged the children to remain calm, to observe quietly, and to learn the lessons of resilience that survival demanded. Her role had shifted from caretaker to protector, strategist, and guide. By evening, the battle was over. The village lay in ruins, scarred by flames, blood, and the heavy toll of combat. The surviving villagers, mostly women and children, gathered together, seeking safety and comfort where they could find it. They whispered stories of the bravery shown during the day, of small victories and acts of courage, but beneath these words was the stark reality of loss. Families had been separated, homes destroyed, and the lives of the village forever altered. As night fell over the fjord, the survivors huddled together, listening to the distant cries of the raiders celebrating their victory. The once thriving village was now a place of sorrow, reflection, and survival. Each person understood that life had changed irrevocably. The challenge now was not just to endure the memories of the battle, but to face the uncertainty of the days ahead, to find courage in the face of fear, and to seek ways to protect what remained of their lives and families. The events of the day would leave a permanent mark on the survivors. For Bjorn and the captured men, the path ahead would be filled with trials, captivity, and the need for resilience. For Astrid and the other women, it was the beginning of a journey that demanded courage, quick thinking, and the strength to endure challenges that were unimaginable before the battle. The village's fate was a harsh lesson in the realities of Viking life. That bravery was required not only on the battlefield, but in the aftermath, in the struggle to survive, and in the ability to adapt to a world defined by conflict, resilience, and unyielding survival. Instincts, the sun rose the next morning over the village, but its light could not warm the hearts of those who had survived the attack. The streets, once filled with laughter and life, were now quiet except for the occasional crackle of smoldering fires. The air was heavy with the scent of ash and smoke, mixed with the faint traces of blood from the battle. The survivors moved cautiously, still fearful of what might come next. Among them was Astrid, holding her daughter's hand tightly, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. The raiders had begun the process of dividing the village's spoils. Men who had fought bravely were bound and led away, their faces a mixture of defiance and despair. Women and children were gathered into separate groups, watched carefully by armed warriors. The captives were treated with a kind of cold calculation. Their future depended entirely on the intentions of the victors. For the villagers, it was a cruel new reality. Survival did not mean safety. It meant adapting quickly to circumstances far beyond their control. Astrid was forced to stand with other women, her hands trembling as she tried to understand what was happening. She could hear whispers among the captives, questions about what would happen to them, speculation about their husbands and fathers, and quiet prayers for protection. Fear hung in the air, thick and suffocating, yet beneath it was a thread of determination. Each woman understood that she must stay strong, not only for herself, but for the children and family members who depended on her. The raiders began to separate the women according to age, perceived strength, and skills. Some were taken for labor, expected to assist in the longhouse or work in fields far from their homes. Others were claimed by the victors for marriage or companionship, a practice that had been common in Viking culture during raids. Astrid watched silently as women she knew, women who had been her friends and neighbors, were led away, disappearing from sight with expressions of fear, defiance, or sorrow. She felt a deep ache in her chest, knowing that she too might be chosen for a fate she could not predict. Astrid's mind raced as she tried to imagine what the coming days would bring. She thought of Bjorn, her husband, captured with the other men. She hoped that he would survive, that he would somehow find a way back to her and the children. But she also knew that hope alone would not be enough. She had to be vigilant, aware of the opportunities and threats that surrounded her. Survival required more than courage. It required intelligence, observation, and the ability to act quickly when a chance presented itself. The group of women was led to a large longhouse belonging to one of the raiding leaders. Inside, the space was warm from a central fire, but the air felt heavy and oppressive. The women were made to sit or stand quietly, observed by armed men. Some of the captives cried softly, while others maintained a stern silence, unwilling to give their fear away. Astrid took a deep breath, holding her daughter close and whispering reassurances, even as her own heart pounded with uncertainty. Days passed in a blur of routine and observation. The women were assigned tasks, preparing food, cleaning, tending to animals, and assisting with other chores in the longhouse. Astrid noticed that the raiders were strict, but not unnecessarily cruel. They enforced rules and expected obedience, but there were moments when the women could catch glimpses of normal human behavior, men laughing quietly, sharing stories, or showing small acts of kindness. These glimpses reminded Astrid that even in captivity, there was room for resilience, cunning, and adaptation. Some women attempted to resist in small ways. They hid objects of value, exchanged whispered messages, or secretly shared food and information. Astrid observed these acts with interest, learning from them while also understanding the risks. In Viking raids, even minor acts of defiance could provoke harsh punishment, so caution was essential. She began to formulate her own plans, small strategies to ensure safety for herself and her children, and to maintain a sense of dignity despite their circumstances. Astrid also noticed the psychological impact of captivity. Fear and uncertainty could weigh heavily on the mind, affecting decision-making and morale. Women who had been strong and independent in their villages sometimes struggled under the constraints of their new reality. Some withdrew into silence, while others displayed anger or desperation. Astrid recognized these patterns, using her own emotional strength to guide her actions and to support the children who were now entirely dependent on her. At night, the longhouse became a place of whispered conversation. Women spoke quietly about their homes, their families, and their hopes for the future. They shared stories of bravery during the attack, of small victories that had kept them alive, and of loved ones they feared had been lost. These stories were not just memories, they were tools of psychological survival. By remembering who they were before the attack, the captives maintained a sense of identity and humanity that the raiders could not take away. Astrid listened intently, contributing her own memories and encouraging the others to hold on to hope, even when hope felt distant. Astrid's daughter became a symbol of resilience. The little girl asked questions, sometimes quietly and sometimes boldly, about the village, her father, and why their lives had changed so suddenly. Astrid answered as honestly as she could, balancing the need to shield her child from fear with the necessity of preparing her for the realities of survival. In doing so, she found renewed strength. Caring for her daughter was not just a duty, it was a source of courage that kept her focused and determined. The raiders also interacted with the captives in more subtle ways. Some of the women were offered small responsibilities or privileges, perhaps as a reward for compliance or as a test of loyalty. Astrid observed these carefully, understanding that navigating this new social structure could increase her chances of survival. She learned to read the men's intentions, to discern who might be reasonable and who was dangerous. Knowledge became a form of power, even in a situation where physical freedom was limited. As weeks passed, Astrid began to notice patterns in the daily life of the longhouse. The raiders had routines, ways of organizing work, and methods for maintaining control. By observing carefully, she could predict some of their movements and decisions. She taught herself and the other women to anticipate needs, to act strategically, and to avoid actions that could draw unwanted attention. In this way, she maintained a measure of control over her life, even when everything else seemed uncertain. There were moments of small kindness and humanity that reminded the captives of life before the raid. A raider might offer a piece of extra bread, allow a woman to tend to her child without interruption, or show patience when a task was done incorrectly. These moments were rare, but they provided a glimpse of normalcy in an otherwise oppressive environment. Astrid learned to recognize these moments, using them to strengthen her morale and the morale of the children. Astrid also formed connections with other women who shared her experience and determination. They exchanged advice, offered emotional support, and helped each other navigate the challenges of captivity. These alliances were vital. In a world where trust was fragile and danger was constant, knowing whom to rely on could make the difference between despair and hope. Together, they found ways to maintain dignity, teach the children, and endure the hardships that lay ahead. Over time, Astrid began to understand the full scope of what captivity meant. She realized that survival would require a balance of caution, adaptability, and resilience. She had to learn when to speak, and when to remain silent, when to act, and when to observe. Every decision, no matter how small, carried consequences. The lessons she had learned in her village about strength, courage, and community were now being applied in a harsher, more unpredictable context. Despite the uncertainty, Astrid held onto hope. She imagined a future where she might see her husband again, where the village could be rebuilt, and where her children could grow up free from fear. This hope was not naive. It was a carefully nurtured belief that provided direction and purpose. In the face of captivity, maintaining hope was an act of resistance, a refusal to surrender entirely to the circumstances imposed by others. The days blended together, each filled with work, observation, and quiet acts of survival. Astrid became adept at navigating the longhouse, understanding the rhythms of the raiders, and teaching the children how to do the same. She learned the limits of endurance, the importance of patience, and the value of human connection, even in a world that had been turned upside down. Every small success, every moment of safety was a victory in itself. Astrid's story, like those of the other women, was one of endurance, intelligence, and courage. Though she had lost the life she once knew, she had not lost her spirit. Each day presented challenges, but it also offered opportunities for learning, adaptation, and survival. Through observation, careful planning, and the support of those around her, she maintained a sense of agency in a situation designed to strip it away. And so, life in captivity continued, harsh and demanding but not without hope. Astrid learned that survival required more than strength. It required awareness, flexibility, and the ability to find courage in unexpected places. She came to understand that even in a world controlled by others, one could retain dignity, identity, and a measure of control. These lessons would become crucial in the days to come, shaping not only her own fate, but also the futures of the children and families who depended on her resilience. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, yet the world outside the longhouse seemed unchanged. The sea still roared against the cliffs, the wind still swept across the northern shores, and the sun rose and fell as it had for centuries. But inside the longhouse, life had taken on a new rhythm, one dictated by the raiders who now controlled the village. The women, including Astrid, learned quickly that survival depended on observation, patience, and careful action. Astrid had grown accustomed to the routines of her captors. She observed the schedules of the men, when they ate, when they slept, when they practiced their drills, and when they were distracted by feasts or games. By noting these patterns, she could move more freely, speak cautiously, and even find moments to teach the children small lessons in strategy and self-protection. Each day became a balance between compliance and quiet assertion of control over her own life. The raiders were not all cruel, though fear and authority colored every interaction. Some of the men showed brief moments of kindness, offering extra bread, helping a child, or speaking with a gentleness that seemed out of place in a world so defined by conquest. Astrid learned to read these nuances carefully. A moment of goodwill could be an opportunity to gain information or a chance to secure small comforts, but it could also be a trap if she misread intentions. In this delicate balance, intelligence became as important as courage. Astrid's role as a mother shaped much of her daily life. Her daughter remained her anchor, a reminder of what she was protecting and why survival mattered so deeply. She taught the girls small but crucial lessons: how to stay calm when fear rose, how to notice the moods of the raiders, and how to observe without drawing attention. These lessons were more than practical. They were a way to instill confidence and resilience. In a world dominated by adults and warriors, the ability to think, observe, and act wisely could be a child's most valuable tool. The women began forming alliances. At first, these were cautious interactions: a shared glance, a whispered word, or a subtle signal in the kitchen or during chores. Over time, trust developed among those who demonstrated intelligence, discretion, and courage. Together, they found ways to share information, alert each other to danger, and provide emotional support. These bonds became crucial, offering a sense of community even under the strict supervision of the raiders. Astrid played a careful role in this network, balancing caution with the need to form connections that could enhance survival. Resistance took many forms, subtle and creative. Some women hid small objects, like knives, tools, or pieces of food, for protection or barter. Others found ways to secretly communicate with captives in other parts of the village, using simple codes or gestures. Astrid herself engaged in careful observation, noting the strengths and weaknesses of the raiders and the layout of the longhouse. She taught the older children small skills: how to move quietly, how to avoid attention, and how to recognize moments of opportunity without risking safety. Every act of awareness and preparation was a small but significant form of resistance. Daily chores were grueling but offered a measure of control. Preparing food, tending animals, repairing clothing, and cleaning the longhouse consumed much of the day, yet they also provided structure. Astrid approached each task with diligence, understanding that competence could earn respect from the raiders and reduce the likelihood of punishment. At the same time, she looked for ways to make her work serve multiple purposes: hiding small valuables, teaching children practical skills, and maintaining a sense of dignity. The line between survival and adaptation was narrow but crucial. Fear was a constant companion, yet it did not dominate Astrid's thoughts. She had learned that acknowledging fear without succumbing to it was a form of power. She remained alert, observing the raiders' moods, noticing patterns in their behavior, and watching the movements of other captives. She encouraged other women to do the same, gently fostering awareness and cautious optimism. By focusing on what could be controlled, Astrid and her allies found a sense of agency that the raiders could not entirely take away. Interactions with the raiders required careful calculation. Astrid discovered that showing too much defiance could provoke punishment, but showing too much submission could result in loss of respect or dignity. She learned to navigate these interactions with subtlety, answering questions honestly when it was safe, remaining silent when it was prudent, and using small acts of kindness or intelligence to create opportunities for safety or comfort. Over time, she developed a keen sense of human behavior, a skill that would be vital for her survival. The children became participants in this subtle struggle. They were taught to move quietly, observe attentively, and respond cautiously. Even simple games became lessons in strategy. Hiding and seeking transformed into exercises in awareness and patience. Astrid understood that equipping the children with these skills was essential. Their survival depended not only on physical protection, but also on mental acuity, observation, and the ability to make quick decisions in unpredictable situations. Astrid also used storytelling as a tool. In the evenings, after chores were done, she gathered the children and other young captives to tell stories of their village, of bravery, and of resilience. These stories served multiple purposes. They reinforced cultural identity, taught moral lessons, and nurtured hope. Even under captivity, storytelling became a subtle act of resistance, preserving the memory of who they were and where they came from. It reminded the captives that their identity could not be erased, even by the raiders who controlled their physical world. Some women attempted more daring acts of resistance. They explored the boundaries of the longhouse and surrounding area, memorizing paths, entrances, and exits. Others sought to gather intelligence about the raiders' plans or vulnerabilities. Astrid observed these attempts closely, learning from successes and failures alike. She understood that survival required both caution and courage, that the line between safety and danger was often defined by intelligence, foresight, and timing. Over time, Astrid also realized the importance of mental resilience. Captivity was as much a psychological challenge as a physical one. Fear, despair, and uncertainty could weaken resolve, while hope, careful planning, and community could strengthen it. She developed strategies to maintain morale, organizing small cooperative tasks among the women, offering guidance to younger or more frightened captives, and finding moments of levity and humor when possible. These acts, though small, created a psychological buffer against the constant pressure of captivity. Astrid began to notice subtle changes in the raiders' behavior as well. Some grew complacent, assuming complete control over the captives. Others displayed occasional flashes of emotion or distraction, which Astrid and her allies observed carefully. These moments could be exploited in small ways, securing extra provisions, learning information about the surrounding area, or creating brief opportunities for communication among captives. Every observation became a tool, and every small act of foresight increased the likelihood of survival. Food, clothing, and shelter were always concerns. The raiders provided the basic necessities, but scarcity was common. Astrid learned to ration carefully, sharing resources among children and weaker captives, ensuring that no one suffered unnecessarily. She also taught practical skills: how to mend clothing, preserve food, and maintain warmth during harsh northern nights. These lessons became part of the daily survival strategy, strengthening both body and mind. Astrid's leadership grew over time, not through official title, but through competence, courage, and intelligence. Other women and even older children looked to her for guidance, advice, and support. She helped mediate conflicts, provided counsel on dangerous decisions, and maintained a sense of calm during moments of panic. Her influence was subtle but effective, creating a small network of resilience that strengthened the group's ability to endure captivity. Despite the challenges, Astrid never lost sight of hope. She envisioned a future where her family might reunite, where the village could rebuild, and where the children could grow free from fear. This hope was not passive. It was active, shaping decisions, guiding actions, and reinforcing resilience. Each small victory, protecting a child, avoiding punishment, learning information, was a step toward reclaiming some measure of agency in a world that had once seemed completely controlled by others. Astrid also reflected on the lessons of the past. She thought of the village before the raid, the harmony, the sense of community, the shared work, and the courage displayed by every member. She realized that these qualities had not disappeared. They lived on in her actions and in the collective strength of the captives. In this way, the memory of the village became a source of power, a reminder that they were capable of endurance, courage, and intelligence even under the harshest circumstances. Months passed, and life in captivity became a complex dance of observation, caution, and adaptation. The raiders' control was strong, but not absolute. Astrid and the women found ways to maintain dignity, to teach the children, and to resist in subtle, clever ways. Every task, every interaction, every observation became part of a larger strategy for survival. Their resilience was quiet but unyielding, a testament to human strength even in the most challenging circumstances. Astrid had transformed from a frightened captive into a strategic, resilient leader within her small group. She had learned to navigate the dangers of captivity, protect her family, and maintain hope in a world designed to suppress it. She understood that survival was not simply about enduring. It was about observing, adapting, and finding strength in community, intelligence, and courage. And so life continued in the longhouse, harsh and demanding, but filled with lessons, strategies, and moments of human connection. Each day presented challenges, but also opportunities for subtle resistance, personal growth, and the preservation of identity. The captives learned that while their physical freedom had been restricted, their minds, courage, and ingenuity could remain unconquered. The seasons shifted, and the once bright village now lay in a state of quiet transformation. The raiders had established themselves, yet even under their dominance, life slowly found a rhythm. The captives had adapted, learning to navigate the routines and behaviors of their new reality. Astrid, who had once been filled with fear and uncertainty, had become a steady presence among the women and children, a guide and protector who helped them endure the hardships that continued to shape their lives. Astrid thought often of Bjorn, her husband, and the other captured men. Their fates were largely unknown, leaving her with a constant mixture of worry and hope. She understood that, while the raiders had claimed the village and its people, the human spirit was not easily conquered. In her mind, she held onto memories of the life they had before the attack, the laughter of children in the village square, the warmth of her home, and the bonds of community that had once defined their existence. These memories became a source of strength, reinforcing her determination to protect the children and maintain a sense of dignity for herself and the other women. The raiders treated the captives according to a hierarchy that reflected both utility and favor. Women who demonstrated skill, intelligence, or adaptability were often given tasks that carried responsibility, but also provided opportunities for influence. Astrid's ability to manage chores, teach the children, and support the other captives did not go unnoticed. She found that subtle displays of competence earned her small freedoms. A bit of privacy, additional food, or the ability to move within certain areas without strict supervision. These privileges were not granted out of kindness, but out of recognition that her abilities were valuable. Astrid learned to use these moments wisely, observing, planning, and preparing for future possibilities. The children grew under her guidance. Even in captivity, she ensured that they learned not only practical skills, but also the lessons of resilience, observation, and strategy. They were taught to move carefully, speak thoughtfully, and notice patterns in behavior that might indicate opportunity or danger. By equipping them with these skills, Astrid gave them tools to survive both the immediate hardships and the uncertainties of the future. Each small lesson reinforced the idea that intelligence and awareness could offer a measure of protection, even in a world controlled by others. Astrid also continued to foster alliances among the women. These bonds were now stronger, built on months of shared experiences, challenges, and strategies for survival. They exchanged advice on how to manage chores, navigate interactions with the raiders, and protect their children. They shared information about patterns they observed, subtle shifts in behavior, and opportunities for minor acts of resistance. Together, they created a network of support that mitigated the isolation and fear of captivity, providing emotional strength in addition to practical guidance. Over time, Astrid noticed the psychological impact of prolonged captivity on both the raiders and the captives. Fear, fatigue, and routine affected everyone differently. Some raiders became complacent, their vigilance waning over time. Some captives grew anxious or despondent, struggling with the loss of home, family, and freedom. Astrid recognized that emotional resilience was as important as physical endurance. She continued to encourage the captives to support each other, to maintain routines that reinforced their sense of identity, and to find small joys or accomplishments that could sustain morale. Communication became an essential skill. Whispered messages, coded gestures, and careful observations allowed the women to share information and warn each other of dangers or opportunities. Astrid's guidance was crucial in maintaining these systems. She emphasized discretion, teaching that even minor mistakes could have serious consequences. Through careful planning and collaboration, the captives learned to maintain a sense of agency, even in a setting where their freedom was limited. The raiders' behavior was not entirely predictable. Some days brought routine and relative calm. Other days, sudden demands, inspections, or punishments created fear and tension. Astrid learned to anticipate these shifts, observing the moods and habits of the men who controlled their lives. She taught the children and other captives to do the same, to notice subtle changes, to respond with caution, and to act when opportunities arose. Awareness became a tool for survival, a quiet way of reclaiming some measure of control. Despite the harshness of captivity, moments of humanity persisted. Women shared stories of their past lives, teaching songs, traditions, and skills that connected them to the village they had lost. Astrid encouraged these exchanges, understanding that maintaining cultural identity was vital for morale and psychological survival. Through storytelling, laughter, and shared memory, the captives preserved a sense of self, asserting that they were more than mere property of the raiders. These acts, subtle yet powerful, were forms of resistance in their own right. Astrid's daughter thrived under her guidance. She became observant, cautious, and resilient, learning to interpret behavior and anticipate situations. Through play, instruction, and careful attention, the child absorbed lessons that would serve her in ways both immediate and long-term. Astrid took comfort in this progress, recognizing that the next generation would carry forward both the knowledge and the strength required to navigate a world filled with unpredictability. The captives' endurance also attracted the attention of the raiders. Those who demonstrated intelligence and reliability were sometimes entrusted with small responsibilities. Astrid used these moments strategically, securing better conditions for herself and the children, gathering information about the surrounding area, and helping to maintain a sense of order among the other captives. She understood that influence, even minor, could be a tool for survival, allowing her to protect the vulnerable and prepare for eventual opportunities to improve their situation. Months turned into a year, and the village outside slowly began to rebuild under the watchful eyes of the raiders. Homes were repaired, fields replanted, and livestock tended. The raiders established a semblance of order, and the captives adapted to this new reality. Yet, despite the outward restoration of normalcy, the psychological scars of the initial attack remained. The captives carried memories of loss, fear, and separation, and these memories shaped their interactions, decisions, and strategies for survival. Astrid reflected on the transformation within herself. She had entered captivity as a fearful, uncertain woman, yet she had grown into a leader, protector, and strategist. She had learned to navigate a world where freedom was limited, but agency was not entirely lost. She understood that endurance required a combination of intelligence, courage, and emotional resilience. Her ability to observe, adapt, and teach others had allowed her not only to survive, but to help others endure as well. As the years passed, some captives found ways to negotiate small freedoms or even forms of independence within the constraints imposed by the raiders. Marriages arranged to secure favor, small economic contributions, or exceptional displays of competence could result in improved conditions. Astrid observed these developments carefully, learning from successes and failures alike. She remained cautious but hopeful, understanding that survival was an ongoing process, shaped by observation, intelligence, and the careful use of opportunity. The long-term effects of captivity were complex. Women who had endured the harshest conditions often emerged stronger, with heightened awareness, resilience, and leadership skills. Children learned adaptability, observation, and strategic thinking. The village itself, though altered, retained elements of its former identity through the stories, traditions, and resilience of its people. In this way, even under conquest, life continued, shaped by human strength and ingenuity. Astrid maintained hope that one day she might see her husband again. She imagined reunions, rebuilding homes, and restoring the village to its former vibrancy. Though these thoughts were often bittersweet, they provided direction and purpose. Hope was a critical force, sustaining both her own spirit and that of the captives around her. In the midst of a world controlled by others, it was a reminder that the human spirit could endure, adapt, and ultimately reclaim agency. As time went on, Astrid began to see that resilience and courage were contagious. The children and women she guided began to exhibit the same awareness, intelligence, and determination that she had cultivated. They learned to move carefully, observe attentively, and act decisively. In their growth, she saw the possibility of future strength, the continuation of traditions, and the preservation of identity, even in a world shaped by conquest and uncertainty. The village, though no longer wholly their own, became a place where life could continue. The raiders established structures and routines, but the captives, through observation, skill, and careful strategy, maintained dignity and influence within their limited sphere. Astrid's leadership ensured that the children and weaker captives were protected, that knowledge and traditions were preserved, and that hope remained a guiding force. Eventually, some of the raiders left, returning to their own lands or taking other captives. Those who remained recognized the value of the women and children under their control, often granting them tasks that required intelligence and reliability. Astrid used these opportunities strategically, strengthening her influence, ensuring the welfare of the children, and teaching lessons that would endure beyond the immediate circumstances. She had learned that patience, intelligence, and courage could create opportunities even in constrained conditions. Astrid's story, like those of countless women and children captured during raids, became a testament to the power of resilience, adaptability, and human spirit. Though the village had been destroyed, families separated, and lives transformed by violence, survival was possible through courage, intelligence, and strategic action. The captives had endured, adapted, and preserved their humanity despite circumstances designed to strip it away. In time, the village settled into a new reality. Life was not the same as before, yet it continued. The survivors carried memories of the past, lessons learned during captivity, and skills that would serve them in the future. Astrid's guidance ensured that the children would grow strong, observant, and resilient, equipped to navigate a world shaped by both hardship and opportunity. She had transformed adversity into learning, fear into awareness, and captivity into a lesson in endurance and strategy. And though the scars of the raid would never fully disappear, the village, its people, and its traditions endured. The stories of bravery, resilience, and human spirit continued to be passed down, ensuring that the experiences of Astrid and others would not be forgotten. In the end, the human capacity to adapt, survive, and maintain dignity shone through even the darkest moments, leaving a legacy that was both remarkable and unforgettable.